This is the second last Sunday in our church year, in the year that we're looking at Luke. And one of the things all three of the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, do is towards the end of our Christian year, they give us readings about the last days of Jesus, the end times that Jesus was talking about. It's known as the apocryphal parts of the gospel. Now, we have to be really careful with understanding of apocryphal. It is not a prediction in the way it is modern folks have interpreted it. It's not a shopping list of what's going to happen that we check things off and then the new things will happen. That's not it at all. Jesus is counting things that have been happening since the beginning of time and will continue to happen. There's nothing brand new in the list of things that Jesus has said. Just pointing out that these things will all happen. They will always continue to happen, even with people working towards bringing in the new world of God. So don't be afraid of these things. These things are not, well, they're signs, but they're not predictive signs. They're signs of God working in the world, because even though things are bad, there's always good people working within bad situations. I mean, that's straight up the gospel of Mr. Rogers. He, also a Christian who understood what Jesus was getting at. So as we look at the gospel this week, the penultimate gospel reading in the year, we look at Luke. Jesus and his friends are visiting the temple. Now, the temple was the center of worship. And it was so significant that every year there were 3 festivals where the Hebrew people had to come and bring sacrifices, if they could, to the temple. That's the only place that was done. Now, synagogues existed in this point in history. We're not sure where they came from, but they existed as places of worship, places of learning, but they were not replacements for the temple. That came much, much later, after the destruction of the temple and after the Hebrew diaspora had started to form a new identity as people no longer living in the Holy Land. That's when synagogues started to take on more importance, because they were the place where the community gathered. But we're not there yet. We are just in the early throes. And the temple was destroyed around the year 70. Luke is writing around the year 90. So we're talking an experience that happened within the living lifetime of the majority of people who would be listening to Luke, or at the very least, their parents who would have told them the story. So this is really, really fresh historically for the people, the audience who was listening to Luke. And it's there that we have to start, because those folks would have had an understanding that when Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple, there was a metaphor of the destruction of him. Because the proto-Christian, the early Christian community had already started to see Jesus as their focus, whereas the Hebraic tradition had the temple as their focus. So by paralleling Jesus and the temple, the earliest form of Christian followers would have made that connection, and they would have connected it to the resurrection. That not a stone will be left unturned. With complete destruction, that would equate to the destruction of Jesus' body and the destruction of death that he suffered under Pontius Pilate and the others, the Roman government. So the Roman government was who destroyed the temple. All of these parallels would have been so natural for the first generation of hearers of this story. And Jesus told them, things are going to happen to you because of me. Let's not have any doubt about what this is going on. My life angers people. And to be very honest, living true to Jesus' call angers people today too. It's not just something that happened 2,000 years ago. In fact, it really, really gets under the skin of a lot of people today, but that doesn't mean we don't do it. Jesus was telling them, through this opportunity, through this time where you're being criticized, in their regard potentially arrested, in our regard just insulted by maybe family and friends that we know, it gives us an opportunity to testify. And this is so important on the second last week of the Christian year, because we know that the church goes on, and it has to go on, but it must go on depending on the followers to do the work. And that's you and me and everybody else who understands what Jesus was trying to teach. Jesus was not interested in rebuilding a temple. He was the place of worship. He was the place of reverence and respect. He was the sacrifice in some regards that was done at the temple. He was all of these ritual things and all of these living examples of how to live the way God wanted us to live. And as the people were listening to this story, they would have started putting that parallel together. Jesus didn't come to revolutionize the Hebrew tradition. He was very content in his home faith. That wasn't the point. He was there to bring people back to it, bring people back to a relationship with God. He showed that he felt it was watered down, that people didn't understand what was required of them, didn't understand how to live in God's world. It had become too ritualized, too legalistic. It wasn't moving enough of the heart and the mind. It was basically a list, a kitchen list, check off these boxes and I will be faithful. And Jesus showed that wasn't the point. And here he was telling his people, you're going to face grief. Some of you are going to be arrested and may die. But this is where the eternal hope of apocryphal literature comes in. But there's not going to be a hair on your head harmed. Now, it's counterintuitive. You die, obviously, then your entire body is harmed by that. But the thing is that we are new people. Outside of this body, inside of this body, doesn't really matter. That's about semantics. But when we follow Christ, we find something new. We find something that will give us the words and the wisdom and help us find the opportunities to share those with people. We just have to trust that Jesus can give us what we need at the moment we need it. But the first part is that we have to stand up and say, I believe in this. I believe so strongly in this that I'm going to do something about it. I believe so strongly in this that even though you tell me all sorts of horrible things, I am still going to stand up and say, yeah, but this is what this means to me. This is how I see it. And this is how I understand the gospel. We're all called to be around. And it is so easy to get caught up in the laundry list of faith. It's comforting, quite frankly, to be able to just say, okay, I did this and I did this and I prayed and I wore these clothes and I attended this worship. I mean, that is easy, but that is not faith. And Jesus is asking us for faith to get out there to spread the message. This is another call in his ministry to remind people that he only started the work. God only starts the work. We as co-creators, we as the ones responsible for sharing the gospel beyond the realm where Jesus lived, we are the ones who have to take that responsibility seriously. And even though the temples may be torn down and wars and destructions will be constant, that is not the end. Famines come and go. Fighting will begin and end. All of that will go on. None of it is the ultimate moment when Christ will return or when the temple will be destroyed. We have to keep moving forward, keep this message of Christianity going forward. We don't end it here. In fact, next week when we look at Reign of Christ as the last Sunday, we learn a thing or two about what the cross has meant, and then right away we are thrust again into the promise, courtesy of John the Baptist, of who Jesus is and what Jesus will bring. We don't stop. God doesn't stop. The gospel doesn't stop. We just have a heightened moment right now where we can rejig again and look at where we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. That is what we're called to do, no matter what the hardships we face, no matter what the hardships other people face. God is with us, giving us the language to share the message. We just have to agree to be participants in that message, regardless of consequences.